Hi, today I'll be keeping you company by telling you a scary story about a young man, Andi, hears whispers about a secluded graveyard haunted by a Sundel Bolong. He's dared by friends to visit it, believing it's all just local superstition. You'll be shocked by the plot twist. So, make sure your pillow is comfy, put on your earbuds, wrap yourself in a blanket, and welcome to the Urban and Myth Scary Story Podcast, Episode 7, The Hole in the Night, Chapter 1, The Dare. It was the kind of night where the rain didn't just fall, it pounded like fists on a door. Andi sat with his friends at a dimly lit warung, the smell of fried food and clove cigarettes hanging in the air, mixing with the humidity. The world outside felt distant, blurred through the rain-splattered windows, muted by the constant drumming of water on the metal roof. Inside, they laughed, joked, and dared one another. They always did this on nights like this, when boredom stretched the hours too thin. Tonight, it was Rizal's turn to stir the pot. He leaned back in his chair, a grin crawling up his face, his eyes gleaming with that all-too-familiar spark of mischief. "You guys ever hear about the Sundel Bolong?" he asked, his voice low enough to draw everyone in, but loud enough to make sure Andi, the skeptic, heard it clearly. Andi took a long drag from his cigarette and exhaled slowly, trying to feign indifference. "Here we go again," he muttered. "More ghost stories." Rizal's grin widened. "No joke, man. You know the old graveyard down by the river? The one nobody goes near? That's where she's been seen. A woman hollowed out, her back wide open. They say she comes out on nights like this, searching for someone." The wind picked up outside, rattling the thin walls of the warung. Andi felt it then, that twinge at the back of his mind, the primal instinct that told him not to listen, not to let this story sink in. But Rizal was relentless. "Why don't you check it out, Andi? Go see if she's real." "What, scared?" Andi leaned forward, grinding his cigarette into the ashtray. His hands felt a little colder than usual, but his pride was still intact. Scared? Of what? An old legend? It was a game. Always a game. But tonight, Andi sensed something in the air. Something beyond the cold drizzle, beyond the laughter of his friends. There was a pressure, like the very night was holding its breath, waiting for him to make a move. "Fine," Andi said, standing up. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "I'll go, but if I don't come back, you know why." The laughter followed him as he stepped outside, swallowed by the rain and the darkness. The walk to the graveyard wasn't long, but with every step, it felt like the shadows were closing in, the weight of something unseen pressing against him. It wasn't ghosts he feared. He didn't believe in that nonsense. But something about the dare, the way Rizal had told the story, had wormed its way into his thoughts. By the time he reached the old iron gates of the graveyard, Andi's mind was racing with every possible explanation for what he might find. "It's just a place," he told himself again, "just an old graveyard." But in the pit of his stomach, he knew this night was going to be different. Chapter 2, Into the Graveyard. The rain drummed harder against the gravestones, like 1,000 tiny fingers tapping, urging Andi forward. The graveyard sat just off the road, half forgotten and swallowed by jungle vines that clung to the crumbling stone markers. Andi paused at the entrance, gripping the iron gate, feeling its cold, wet rust seep into his skin. The dare seemed foolish now. He could barely see 5 feet ahead of him. Shadows danced under the pale moonlight that fought to break through the rain clouds, casting long, twisted shapes over the graves. But turning back wasn't an option. He could practically hear Rizal and the others laughing in his head, calling him a coward. and that was something Andi wouldn't stand for. He stepped inside. The ground was soft, muddy, pulling at his shoes with each step. The smell hit him next, damp earth mixed with something older, something sour that hung in the air like a forgotten memory. He couldn't tell if it was real or his imagination playing tricks on him. The graves here were old, most of the names worn down by time and weather, barely legible. Andi found himself wondering if anyone even visited these graves anymore, or if the stories of the Sundel Bolong had scared people away for good. He felt his heart beating harder as he walked deeper into the graveyard, every breath louder in the silence that had wrapped itself around the night. Suddenly, a soft sound, just behind him, a whisper, or maybe the wind, but it was enough to make him freeze in place, his breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he turned, shining his flashlight toward the source. Nothing, just the overgrown brush and rain falling in uneven sheets. Andi swallowed hard and turned back, quickening his pace, the beam of his flashlight bouncing ahead of him. Then he saw it. A figure standing between two gravestones, half shrouded in shadow. A woman. Her hair, long and black, hung down over her face, wet and matted from the rain. Andi's stomach dropped. His feet refused to move. He told himself it was a trick of the light, a play of shadows. But deep down, he knew better. The figure shifted slightly, a barely perceptible movement, but enough to make his heart race. He wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to turn and leave. But he couldn't. Not yet. He had to see. He raised the flashlight higher, the beam slicing through the rain. And that's when he saw her face. Or rather, where her face should have been. Chapter 3. The Encounter. Andi's breath hitched as the beam of his flashlight illuminated the figure in full. The woman's face, or the absence of it, was obscured, her head angled downward, hair a tangled mess of wet black strands. Her dress clung to her in the rain, dirty and torn, as if she had crawled out of a grave herself. And there, beneath the matted hair, was a sight that turned Andi's blood cold. The back of her dress was ripped wide open, revealing an empty, gaping cavity where her spine and skin should have been. Flesh hung in ragged shreds, and the hole seemed impossibly deep, like an endless void. The rain slid into the wound, vanishing as though swallowed by darkness. Andi stumbled backward, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. This was a Sundel Bolong, the very thing he had mocked just hours ago. But the ghost wasn't some distant mythical figure. It stood right in front of him, breathing, real. His legs felt weak, but he couldn't move. His heart slammed against his chest, faster and faster. A scream hovered at the back of his throat, but it wouldn't come out. Fear had stolen his voice. The figure shifted again, and this time, the woman's head slowly began to lift, revealing just enough of her face for him to see the edges of a grin, a smile too wide, too wrong. It stretched unnaturally across what remained of her pale, sunken features. Her lips curled upward in a grotesque imitation of joy, but there was no life in her eyes. In the faint light of his flashlight, something glimmered, something familiar. His heart seized in his chest as recognition washed over him like ice. The contours of her face, underneath the horror, resembled someone he once knew, someone he had loved, someone he hadn't thought about in a long time. Nanisa? The name barely escaped his lips, trembling in the night. The figure stepped closer, the sound of her movements lost beneath the rain. Andi stumbled back, shaking his head. It couldn't be. Nisa was gone. She had vanished a year ago, without a trace. No one knew what had happened to her. He had grieved, eventually moved on, or tried to. But this couldn't be real. "Nisa," he whispered again, his voice hoarse. The more he looked, the more undeniable it became. The shape of her face, the way her hair fell, even the way she moved. It was her, or something that looked like her. The woman, Nisa, took another step forward, her grin widening. Andy's flashlight flickered, and for a split second, everything went black. When the light returned, she was only a foot away. He wanted to scream, wanted to run, but he was paralyzed, trapped between disbelief and terror. And then, in a voice as soft as the rain, she spoke. "Andy," she whispered, her voice echoing from somewhere deep within the hollow cavity in her back. "Why did you leave me?" Chapter 4. The Past Resurfaces. Andy's mind swam with memories, jagged fragments of the past cutting through the fog of terror. Nisa's smile, her laugh, the way her hand would brush against his when they walked together. They had been happy, or at least he had thought so. But then, without warning, she had vanished, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and sleepless nights. He had searched, pleaded with the police, even went through her belongings, trying to find any clue that might explain where she had gone, but it had all led to dead ends. And now, here she was, or what was left of her. The figure, Nisa, hovered in front of him, her voice an eerie echo that seemed to vibrate in his bones. "Why did you leave me, Andy?" His mouth moved, but no words came out. His mind was still fighting against the reality of what stood before him, grappling with the impossible truth. Could this really be her? Had she somehow come back? I didn't, he finally managed to stammer, though his voice felt weak, drowned out by the rain and the pounding of his heart. "I didn't leave you, Nisa. You left. You disappeared." She didn't respond at first. Instead, she moved closer, her hollowed-out back visible now in the full light of his flickering flashlight. The hole gaped like a wound that refused to heal, dark and endless. Andy's stomach churned. He fought the urge to turn away, to close his eyes and shut out the nightmare. "Liar," she whispered, her voice filled with pain that pierced through the air. "You left me. You didn't care. You didn't even know." A cold dread settled into Andy's chest. He wanted to deny it, to push back against the accusations, but something in her words sent a shiver down his spine. What didn't he know? Nisa, if this was Nisa, seemed to read his thoughts, her expression twisting with grief and anger. "You didn't even know, did you, that I was pregnant with your child?" Andy's heart stopped. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Pregnant? The thought had never even crossed his mind. He stared at her, his brain struggling to catch up, to process the weight of what she was telling him. Nisa had been carrying his child when she disappeared. His legs gave out, and he collapsed to his knees, the mud soaking into his jeans, the cold seeping into his bones. "Nisa, I didn't know. I didn't..." She took another step forward, her cold hand reaching out to touch his face. Her touch was like ice, and Andy flinched at the contact. Her eyes, dark and hollow, bore into him with a mixture of sorrow and rage. "You didn't know," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "But now you will." Chapter 5. The Revelation. Andy's world shifted, collapsing in on itself like a black hole, sucking all sense of reason into the void. His mind reeled with Nisa's words. Pregnant? His child? He knelt there, drenched in rain and terror, the weight of her revelation crashing down on him with the force of 1,000 unanswered questions. Every moment they'd shared played back in his mind, twisted now by the dark truth that had been buried beneath the surface all along. Nisa stood over him, her figure impossibly tall, the gaping hole in her back still impossibly dark, a reminder that something had gone terribly wrong. Her once familiar face now carried the weight of something grotesque, something otherworldly, but her eyes, they were still Nisa's. Behind the deadness, behind the void, something of her remained. And that was almost worse. "You didn't care enough to find me," she said softly, her voice like a distant echo, as if coming from deep within the void of her back. "You let me disappear." Andi shook his head, fighting the words. "No, I searched, Nisa. I never stopped looking. The police. I tried. I didn't know." Her smile widened, but it was filled with bitterness, stretching the skin of her face in ways that defied nature. "You didn't know because you never really looked. And now you will know everything. Now you will feel what I felt." Andi's breath came in short, panicked bursts. He wanted to scream, but his voice was lost in the roar of the rain and the hammering of his own heartbeat. The weight of guilt pressed down on him, suffocating him, twisting the knife of regret deeper into his chest. He had thought of Nisa often after she disappeared, but he had moved on. Life had demanded it. He'd let her fade into the background, just another ghost of his past. And now, she had returned, carved open, hollow, angry, and filled with vengeance. Who did this to you?" Andi stammered, desperate to focus on something other than the monstrous truth. "Who hurt you, Nisa?" Nisa's eyes glinted with something darker than rage, something deeper than grief. She took another step toward him, her bare feet making no sound on the wet earth, and crouched down so her hollow, mutilated face was level with his. The rain seemed to fall slower, the air colder. "You did," she whispered, her breath chilling his skin. "You killed me." Andi recoiled, his back hitting the cold, hard ground as his mind raced. No, I didn't. I didn't do anything." She leaned closer, her cold, wet hand reaching out and pressing against his chest. His skin burned beneath her touch, the cold sinking into his bones. "You left me," she said again. "You didn't come back when I needed you most. And now—" Her voice dropped, her words barely more than a breath. "Now I will show you what it means to be left behind." The darkness in her voice matched the emptiness in her back, a pit that had no end. As she spoke, the hole seemed to grow, the blackness inside it pulsating, breathing, swallowing the world around them. Andi felt as if he were being pulled into it, dragged toward something cold, something eternal. The memories hit him like a tidal wave, flooding his mind with moments he had tried to forget. Nisa's last phone call, her voice trembling with something unsaid. He had brushed it off. He had been busy. He had promised to call back. He never had. And now, he realized, that had been the last time, the last chance, the last time he could have saved her. I didn't know," Andi whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. But Nisa's face twisted, her features warping as she leaned even closer. "You didn't want to know." The words cut deeper than the cold, deeper than any wound. The world around them seemed to twist, the rain slowing to a near standstill, the shadows growing taller, swallowing the graveyard whole. Andi felt like he was falling, spiraling into that endless blackness, into the void that Nisa had become. And then, with one final breath, she whispered, "Now you'll understand." Chapter 6. The Price of Secrets. Andi lay on the wet ground, his mind spinning, the weight of Nisa's words settling into the marrow of his bones. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world around him had transformed into something darker, something alien. The rain, once relentless, now felt distant, a faint patter on a grave he wasn't sure he'd ever escape from. The air seemed thicker, like he was drowning in more than just guilt. Nisa stood over him, the hollow in her back pulsing like a living wound, its depth pulling everything into its emptiness. He could feel it now, an unnatural force, a gravitational pull, like the hole in her body was trying to swallow the world itself, starting with him. "You're going to understand what it means to be forgotten," she whispered. Her voice was a soft, venomous echo that chilled Andi to his core. "I didn't mean to..." Andi's voice cracked as he struggled to form words. The truth sat heavy on his chest, suffocating him. He hadn't been there. He hadn't answered that call. He hadn't known she was carrying his child. He had let her fade into the background. But none of that changed the fact that he wasn't responsible for her death. Was he? "What happened to you, Nisa?" His voice was thin, barely audible, but he forced the question out, desperate for an answer that could free him from the guilt crushing his heart. "Who killed you?" For a moment, her twisted smile faltered. Her eyes, dark and hollow as they were, softened for just a second. But then the smile returned, wider, more grotesque, as if something inside her delighted in the horror she was about to reveal. "You did," she hissed again, but her voice no longer sounded like Nisa's. It was deeper now, more primal, as if something else was speaking through her, something far more ancient and malevolent. "When you abandoned me." The hole in her back seemed to widen, the void inside it breathing, alive. Andi's mind screamed at him to get up, to run, to fight, but his body was frozen. He could feel the cold of the earth beneath him, the mud seeping into his skin, but none of it mattered anymore. Nisa's presence loomed over him, her hollow gaze locking him in place, making escape impossible. "You left me to die," she whispered. "You left our child to die." Andi's throat tightened. His pulse pounded in his ears, his vision blurring with panic. "Nisa, please, I didn't know..." Her face shifted, contorting with rage, her voice rising to a chilling crescendo. "But now you will know. Now you will feel what it's like to be abandoned, to be left in the dark, to be forgotten." The void in her back pulsed again, and Andi felt something pulling at him, physically pulling him toward that hollow darkness. It was like the very ground beneath him was giving way, like the fabric of reality itself was unraveling around him. He reached out, clawing at the mud, at the grass, trying to stop himself from being dragged toward that impossible, endless blackness. "I'm sorry," Andi screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'm sorry, Nisa. I didn't know." But the pull grew stronger, and as he was dragged closer to the void, Nisa's face seemed to change again. She no longer looked like herself. Her features melted into something monstrous, something that belonged in the deepest nightmares, a blend of human and ghost, pain and fury. She had become the very thing the legends warned of, a spirit consumed by vengeance, by the unfulfilled need for justice. Andi. Her voice now echoed from the void itself, like the darkness was speaking to him. "It's too late for sorry." He screamed again, louder this time, but the sound was swallowed by the hole in her back, disappearing into the black void like everything else. His fingers dug into the earth, but it was no use. The void was too strong. Andi's body jerked as the pull became overwhelming, and he found himself falling, not down, but into the void, into the endless darkness that Nisa had become, into the secret he could never escape. As the world around him collapsed into blackness, the last thing he saw was her face, no longer smiling, no longer twisted with hate, just staring, hollow and empty, as if waiting for him to disappear. And then he did. The graveyard was quiet once again. The rain had stopped, the wind had died down, and in the pale light of the moon, the iron gate creaked shut, leaving the world outside untouched by the nightmare that had just unfolded within. No one would ever find Andi. He would become just another part of the legend, another whisper in the dark. And Nisa's revenge would remain unfinished, for now.